lovely, smiling, nice people for coming together. And thank you again, Christy, for Ojai Day. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Weatherman. Thank you, everybody. It was just stupendous. Lots of great feedback. So I'm grateful. Sit here.
Oh,
I have.
you carried on with your hopes.
Protection.
Mayor.
All right.
Look at that. Oh, there it is.
Secret weapon. Well, I was just practicing at home once and I hit it so hard that the wood split. Want to tap. Okay. Call to order. We have a quorum. Could we have roll call, please? Andrew.
Oh,
Weston. Carl.
Present.
Call the roll call. Oh, sure.
Yes, please.
Mayor Sticks.
Here.
Assistant City Manager Alameda.
Present.
Name Trina.
Yeah, Trina.
Chief Gutierrez.
Present.
Let's see, and John McNeil.
Here.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Motion to approve the agenda.
All motions.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Is there any public communication for those?
Nobody online.
Okay, no one in the audience. Okay, let's keep going. Well, we have one action item. The subject is the Emergency Operations Center, EOC tabletop training exercise. So a big thank you to John McNeil for running this. We're so grateful to you and excited to see what's happening. So take it away, please,
Okay,
John.
I will. Carl, do you want to open with anything else or just want me to get into it? What's your preference?
Yeah, thank you to the mayor for being here last night. It was late and Mark is gonna try to stop by, but just wanted to reinforce that at the recent council goal setting, as the mayor knows, that this was one of the city's top priorities, emergency management and training of staff. So we hope to do more things like this. So today is a little more basic. I know a lot of you have been through this, but just to myself get a better comfort level, I like to see it. So if anything, God forbid, were to happen, when we're walking, it's not good. But coming from a very similar agency that has the same risk as Ojai, this was a high priority. So thank you, John, for leading it. It's more of the basics of ICS and the EOC and how it operates.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as introduced, John McNeil. I have a background in fire service. I worked for Ventura County Fire for a handful of years and sit on the disaster council. And I have been on this council for a year and a half. And prior to Carl and Mark getting here, I worked with James Vega quite a bit, and the same priorities that Carl and Mark have for the city, James had, and that was to make sure the city is prepared and ready to respond to any kind of disaster. Or disaster is kind of the focus, but it can be, it can be a planned event, right? It could be if Ojai Day had, I don't know the proper way to say this, but let's just say it had more complexities that you needed to get together and kind of plan for potential issues with a gathering in the city. The EOC could be, operated or activated for that. And again, so it's a variety of reasons, but we'll kind of focus on the disaster side of things and why the EOC could be opened and how it opens. And I know this is a recorded meeting, so those in the audience that are going to watch this later on, the idea with this meeting is to kind of expose people within the community to what the city does during a disaster and when the EOC is activated. So we are physically sitting in the EOC, which is a room within the police station here in Ojai. And I believe, Chief Newman, this is also the briefing room?
Yes, correct.
So it is a dual purpose room, maybe more than dual, but right now it's somewhat configured as the city's EOC. So when city leadership decides to activate the EOC, what physically happens is this. And I watched it this morning when I got here. It took James Hahn, how long? Maybe 10, 15 minutes to get set up physically. And the setup includes laptops, some tables that aren't already in here, connecting the laptops, getting the big screens, the video screens hooked up so everything's connected. There's physical paper maps on the walls. There's telephones that I believe get plugged in and activated. James, anything else I'm missing on the physical layout?
I think that's pretty much it, covering it. Yeah.
Okay. So in your absence, what are we gonna do getting this thing set up? So, there we go. Yeah. So the key to success is always having contingency plans, right? So the question to James was, how do we get this set up if he's not here? Because some of this stuff sits in your office, I believe. So anyways, the idea is to explain it. We won't really exercise it. That's more for a separate day where we can get into the nuts and bolts with all the role players and actually go through an exercise. And the only other thing I want to add before we get into this is really kind of a progression that started, probably a year ago when the city started talking about putting a document out, the Ojai Valley Community Disaster Guide, I think is the actual title, which is a living document and will be massaged and updated as new information comes out. So that was in response to a request from some city council members from a previous council that felt that the community needed some kind of document or some kind of information or a place for residents and tourists and business owners to go to get some information pre-disaster, right? So we started with that. Then it led into training for city staff on EOC operations. And then we actually did a tabletop where we invited quite a few stakeholders. And that was January of this year. And we exercised a scenario of an earthquake. And I think we spent a couple hours, maybe an hour and a half going through that whole exercise. So again, if anyone's watching or wants to review that, I believe the city has all that archived on the website for review if you want. So we're kind of adding to that, right? So now we're taking it a step further because we have new players. We have new key players, including the city manager and the assistant city manager. So I just wanted to quickly just raise your hand if you were not part of the January 25th tabletop exercise at Kent Hall this year. We were not. So just maybe 3 or 4 or 5 maybe. So of course the idea is to, anytime you have new players, just kind of go through an orientation of what the EOC, what it looks like, how it functions, get some input from the city manager's office on maybe when it would get activated and what it could look like configuration wise. So, okay. With that, we talked about new players coming into this team and it's already been mentioned that city leadership has had a turnover and the request from the city manager's office was to go through this. So that's kind of the objective for the next half hour or so. All right.
Do you mind if I interrupt for?
No, please.
In terms of, thank you for bringing that up, Andrea, in terms of off hours when during the day, usually there's always someone here staffed in the front office, but if for some reason EOC was activated during off hours, there's a red phone that's located outside the lobby of the building. And if you pick up that phone, it rings directly to our dispatch. And just let them know that you are with the city and that EOC has been activated and you need access to the station. And either one of our patrol deputies that's on patrol or field sergeant will come here and give you access to the station. And then most of the, if I'm correct, most of the supplies are stored in the cabinets right here, including the phone, some of the binders, I think, are stored here. And that's all there, to be set up. So just so everyone knows that you are able to get access. Anyone from the city is able to get access if needed in case of an emergency.
Great, thanks. Yep. Part of this, the objectives of this particular meeting is, Andrea's taking minutes for it, and we will take information like that and put it into, there's a binder. Every one of the tables here has a binder specific for its role. There's even the management binder that, will have all the details of how this whole thing works, right? And we'll just add that. If it's not already in, then we'll just add that. So, and this is not me just spewing out a bunch of information. I'm hoping to just have a discussion. So if there's any questions or input, please just jump in and add to it.
One thing, Paul, the Chief Newman, the laptops are in City Hall, in the conference room, in the closet. So Jane Ton, I'm sure will be taking care of that, but if for some reason he's not available, that is where they're stored. We can have access to City Hall as well for those who don't work in City Hall.
So just to introduce this topic, this is just a copied information from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and it's really a document. It's a 99-page document, if I remember right, on how an EOC, what it is, how it should operate, and just general guidelines. Now, cities or entities that have their own EOCs can use it as a guideline. It's not verbatim. But in looking at the city's emergency operation plan, there's a lot of similarities. And that's key in that, similar language is used, similar acronyms are used, that our public safety agencies that are actually managing the emergency or disaster that the EOC is open for, we're all kind of speaking the same language. So this is just more of the same language to just kick off the topic. Anyways, introduction. So the routine day-to-day management of government differs greatly from emergency operations. During an emergency, effective decision-making relies on leaders' ability to collect emergency-related information, which requires close coordination between key officials from a variety of departments, agencies, and organizations. That's really what the EOC's whole reason for being is. Here in the city of Ojai, the key players are our public safety agency reps, and that's our chief of police and our chief of fire. And the third key player is our city manager's office, either himself or his designee. Those are the three key players to any EOC activation in the city. Other potential stakeholders could be, have a list from our, here we go. Other key stakeholders that could be in this room, or at least asked to have access to the room or connected through phones or however it's going to be, could be the mayor and the city council members, right? They're going to want to know, they're going to want to be part of it. I mentioned the chief of police, the fire chief, Supervisor Levere's office might want representation. City EOC staff, of course, everyone around the perimeter of the room that has a key role in this. There could be County of Ventura's EOC staff member here as like a liaison. More than likely, it's a city member in their EOC, because the reality and the part of this, the bigger picture to this topic is, if the city's EOC is opened up for some kind of disaster, some kind of event, most likely the county EOC is opened, right? A lot of times the county EOC will open and the cities will not. And that in that situation, it would, this role would be configured different, and it may just be that you send a liaison to the county's EOC. I'm looking at the city managers for the, making sure we're on the same page.
What's your on that if it were a fire? What's the process? Because just for communication purposes, if we're to send a staff member county EOC, would they be accepted with their city ID? No.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And usually there'll be some dialogue between whoever, whether it's myself or fire, who's ever kind of taking command of the incident. There'll be some communication, and for sure they will, whoever is a representative of the city, they'll kind of know that ahead of time, and they'll get passed on to them.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. It's not uncommon for that to potentially happen, especially if we have members of the CSE who live outside the city limits that can't necessarily get in. They may be stationed in the county or another cities working through that agency, and vice versa. If we have somebody from the county who's trapped here, they may come in here, represent the city or the county and work out of this location on behalf of the county, and it's pretty good if we do have people from multiple agencies, because then we have that open communication between those agencies.
It's also another reason it's important to know where your ID,
Mhm.
city ID is, and maybe keep it in your car. That's what I did with mine. I don't
Yeah.
have to give it back, but they give it back to me today. But just so it's always with you, because it will get you potentially through a roadblock even to
Yeah.
try to get to an EOC or what have you. But if you don't have your ID, they don't really know who you are.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I think just kind of relating back to the wildfires, when we had a couple of deputies up here from Thousand Oaks and other areas, we work with the deputies up here in the valley, and they see us, day in, day out. But for those deputies that aren't necessarily up here, a lot of times this is where this ID badge is. Like Andrea said, just want to make sure that you have it accessible to you at all times, either keeping it in your car. I kind of keep mine in my wallet because I know wherever I go, my wallet comes with me. And, when, let's say you're the first one here and responds, well, that deputy that's going to go and come to the door, you show that to them, that's going to be an extra means and measure to actually indicate that you are a city staff member.
They do have new staff. I walked in, I didn't know there was I didn't know who I was, I forgot. So it's like, here you go.
Carl, can you speak to like the disaster worker status of city employees?
Yeah, so any city employee is actual service worker, which means that if a disaster were to arise, that you're expected to be available to staff the EOC. Usually we try to do it in 12-hour shifts, 12-hour increments. So that'd be staffing our own EOC. Just there's a little background, another best practice I found kind of part of the mutual aid is we had a practice that when other more localized events, so the most recent in my recollection is Palisades Estates had a pretty significant landslide subsided, they activated. But we would send members of our staff to their EOC to participate because I've been through 3 activations. We always learn something after action, of course, ways that we can improve processes, ways we can improve communications, things we should know. But we found that valuable sending our staff to go staff these local events and then you come back with every time tips, different tricks that we would help them to kind of capture some of that. But yeah, disaster service worker, the expectation is that you're going to be available and ready to report. But in all likelihood, as John suggested, in disaster, it's really the county's shouldering the vast majority of the work. And typically a smaller agency, it really gets down to the communications piece, putting out timely and correct information, keeping the council updated, and then also knowing the facilities and infrastructure of the city. Because a lot of times if it's a big event, if you have a large county agency, which thankfully we have because they have a huge number of resources, the personnel they send may not know Ojai.
Yeah.
So that becomes a key piece where you have someone like Lindy that knows Ojai in and out, Luis that knows different facilities. Hey, this is a good spot to go. We need to shelter people or we need to shelter animals. So that localized knowledge is also critically important to assist the county.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the key is coordinating at whatever level is appropriate for the, the situation at hand. So, other stakeholders, and I'm gonna move this to the chiefs here in a minute for their input. But other stakeholders that could be there, we talked about the county EOC rep, Ojai Valley News and media partners might be present. Ojai Valley Amateur Radio Club, the Red Cross, the Unified School District, the hospital. Someone might, the hospital staff member might show, or representative. The CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, they may have a role in it, so they may show up. And again, they may not sit at the table and have a bunch of decision influence, but they're representing, you know, an action that they can help you take or some information they may have, right? So that's kind of the role of these stakeholders. The Humane Society might be represented for whatever reason, Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. And then, of course, utility companies seem to always be have some kind of influence or responsibility in disasters, and that's Edison, SoCal Gas, and Casitas Water for the local area. So those were all the stakeholders that showed up at our January 25th tabletop. So it was good to hear their side or their their feel on the whole EOC and disaster conversation. So it was good. So, okay, with that, I guess at this point, it would be interesting to hear from the chiefs and the city manager's office, kind of how does it all work? How do you initiate the EOC activation? Meaning, I'll use a scenario of some kind of weather event. Let's call it, we have rain coming, right? And we have potential for debris flow and flooding issues. So how does it start? And any one of the three key players can start the conversation. How do you get your information and what actions do you take?
So I will say on our end, in terms of public safety from law enforcement, a lot of times we're getting our information from either county fire, or county OES in terms of kind of the pre-planning and any possible areas that something for a disaster that you can pre-plan for, such as weather. Since we're talking about weather, I'm going to go with weather. A lot of times we're getting the information up front and kind of making plans, pre-planning with county fire and a lot of the other stakeholders that you mentioned here in terms of, okay, what is each of our responsibilities and what can we do in preparation for. So those conversations may not necessarily occur in an arena like this where everybody's sitting in the room, because typically, like you mentioned before, the EOC is not activated unless there is, in fact, a disaster, and we all have to be in one room just for communication purposes. But for pre-planning, it's kind of like, we kind of keep up to date on what potentially could happen, and if there's a potential that we feel that arises to something where we have to really have everybody in one room to be able to get things going and to make sure everybody's on the same page, then it would be up to the city manager's office to make that happen. Now in a disaster where you can't pre-plan for, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to make a split decision and determine, okay, look, this is something where we do need to get everybody in the same room so that we are all on the same page and working towards the same goal. Then typically it happens like that. It may be one person that comes to EOC and is the only person in the room for the time being until everybody kind of straggles in. And admittedly, in every event that I've been in, it's always chaotic in the beginning. It's a little bit of a mess. Everybody's trying to determine, what their immediate action should be. And typically, it kind of gets ironed out from that point on. But in terms of law enforcement and our side of it, we are, and I myself am kind of the direct communication with the mayor and the city manager's office, ensuring that what we are doing in terms of public safety is on board with what they have in mind for the city of Ojai, as well as I am also responsible for all the county areas. So I also answer directly to county EOS and my representatives. So I have kind of a split role, but ultimately the goal is all the same, essentially, in terms of responding to, and, Chief, you could probably speak to this, the same thing too. And a huge disaster, our main goals are always to protect life and property. That's the first goal for any type of public safety response. And so our actions typically are reactive, unless it's something we can pre-plan for, like a weather event. but in a huge natural disaster, it's always kind of the reactive and responding to calls for service, people that are stranded, any property damage that needs to be addressed right away. And then in the aftermath, it's the cleanup and the response to the aftermath and the recovery of that, and the security of, for example, the houses that were evacuated during the Thomas fire. And I know I'm kind of being long-winded and stretching it out over a big kind of piece of event, but that would be our typical response and our typical responsibilities.
Fire would be along that same lines for a large scale. So the city of Ojai, just looking at the map, right, you just have the city outlined with one fire station, but really have 4 fire stations up here that serve the city proper, ranging from Upper Ojai to Oakview, and then down in Miners Oaks. So we look at the big picture, depending on the event, whether we do the forecasting with OES and we pre-plan, we'll pre-position resources up in the Ojai Valley if we have a high probability of landslide. Last winter was a great example. We had multiple storms hit us three months in a row that caused significant debris flows, access issues. So along that line of communicating with the city manager on the impacts to Ojai, but understanding that the county areas outside are also going to impact the city of Ojai with one way in, one way out, transportation, logistical needs. So I think just getting on this EOC piece of that communication with that, from fire and public safety to that city resource, to initiate it early or communicate early, and understanding also that the county will have their EOC operational also with OES resources. So I think just trying to pre-plan and make sure that this is awesome for me. I'm a line battalion chief, so I work a 24-hour shift. There's 3 of us in Oakview, but we manage Ojai proper also. So Chief Parker is the fire chief of Ojai. But understanding that we have the same challenges of personnel coming to relieve each other. If they're cut off, if they're isolated, you'll have the same people here. We do have a lot of Ojai residents that work in the Ojai Valley, which is great for common knowledge and area familiarization. But I think moving forward, just these kind of scenarios where we can activate this and see what each role would be and have people actually sit in those seats is awesome.
Just a big shout out to Chief Parker, because when the earthquake hit, he called me immediately and started sending me photographs of stores downtown, and it was fantastic. So great communication, much appreciated.
Yeah, I think Ojai's in a really good position to for this discussion. And what I mean by that is the day-to-day almost communication with public safety leaders, city leadership, the mayor. I mean, it's already happening. So when the sudden one hits, like the earthquake, you can pre-plan for the other weather events, but the earthquake is one that just happens, right? And you got to be on it. It's not like Chief Gutierrez for the first time is talking to the mayor and doesn't even know anything about each other, but they've just spent an hour on this day, discussing this topic. So that familiarity becomes key to being successful in mitigating the issue. And so anyways, I think it's all good. And the point Chief Gutierrez brought up, Chief Parker may not even be in the area when the event happens. So he's going to send a representative, and most likely it is one of the assigned battalion chiefs here, right? And so to get a rep at it already is key. The other key thing I think Ojai Valley, or the city in particular, has is it's got the county as the public safety agencies. So like Chief Newman said, she doesn't only have the responsibility for the city limits, she's got the responsibility for the surrounding area of the county that surrounds the city, right? Well, that makes it very, very less complicated, a lot simpler to mitigate issues that cross city and county boundaries, right? So there's other entities out there or cities out there that don't have that same luxury of the same agency managing those lines, right? So you've got a couple agencies, so you can imagine the complications that could rise there. So I think Ojai is in a really good position to be successful in this moving forward because of just the way things are laid out. So, so I guess at this point, I'd love to ask Carl, the conversations are being had, there's weather coming, there's potential to activate the EOC. What's your thought process? Who are you talking to? What are you thinking about trying to consider that?
In advance of that, what you got, critical about communication between knowing your public safety partners in advance. And then also knowing the community. Weather events aside, it's always good to understand what I call kind of the external risks, things that exist just by their nature that you don't have control of. Fairly new to Ohio, where I came from, we had a freeway that ran through the community. That presented a number of potential hazmat spills, which we had the jet propulsion laboratory that has some very dangerous things that can happen. Having school, some communities may have a prison, some may be coastal, but what are those risks that you don't have control over? And who would be the responding people? The Caltrans, and having those communication lines open. So knowing who kind of the stakeholders and key players are, and knowing those. And then when you're talking about activating or not activating, I always felt it was best if we knew something was going to happen, it was a significant weather event, to maybe activate. We'd even maybe do so a virtual EOC, because you don't have to staff all the sections. You don't have to have all 5 sections staffed. It could be as simple as doing a virtual activation, just a couple staff members watching things, getting the communication as it comes in, so you can make more timely decisions. But I've seen it go very bad when you try to effectively see the office. People aren't talking to each other. So this is always a good structure. And even times I've seen it activated in windstorms, it was just so much easier when Public Works is responding to down trees, blocked roadways, got power outages. It sets itself up to be a good structure. Even if the worst case scenario doesn't arise. And it was funny, we had one time questioning activating. We did activate it. And by the mere fact that we activated, it wasn't a huge event, but we got reimbursement from FEMA because we did activate it. We were doing our 214 points. It was a significant amount of coverage. So from a financial aspect, even if it isn't threat to life, maybe just to property, it's always best to err on the side of passion.
Yeah.
Both for public safety, but also in the longer term, there could be reimbursement of stuff through FEMA.
Yeah. And the keys for activation, or what the EOC is going to generally do in this situation when it is activated, it's really to support public safety, and they're going to mitigate the emergency. There's no expectation that the city of Ojai put their backhoe up on the hill and start cutting line on a wildland fire. I mean, it's not reality. But they are in a supporting role, and the city has influence in the priorities set by public safety, right? So if you don't have that line of communications, they're going to put the fire out. They're going to mitigate the mass shooting, whatever the issue is where the cities, the agencies are dealing with. If the city is not involved with that, meaning given inputs, it's like, hey, we're really concerned. We got a school in that area. We'd really like to get that school. If it's going to be evacuated, we'd like to have a heads up on that so we can get our parents involved, blah, 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 right? So it's a supporting role. The other thing that EOC does is it allows the city manager's office to continue with day-to-day city routine business while assisting or supporting the hazard at hand, right? So it's kind of a dual role. That is why you would open up an EOC in general terms, right? So any questions on that or input on what we've discussed so far? Okay. So primary functions. Okay, what is an EOC, right? Here, and again, I'm reading from the FEMA standards here. And EOC is a central command and control system responsible for carrying out the principles of emergency preparedness and emergency management or disaster management at a strategic level during an emergency, and ensuring the continuity of operations of a company, political subdivision, or other organization. That's straight out of FEMA's terminology. So you can tailor it to the city's needs on that. primary functions. Okay, this is where everyone else gets to add some input. The EOC is, it's set up strategically like the command structure would be set up with our public safety agencies. If Chief Newman is managing a law enforcement extended incident, either she's going to be the incident commander or she's going to have someone be the incident commander. They're going to have all the other sections or roles that this EOC has, right? So the EOC will have an incident commander. We don't necessarily call them the incident commander. They're called EOC director, but it follows the same scalable format that emergency operations follow. And that again is an attempt to speak the same language. So when Chief Newman comes to the EOC and briefs out on what's going on, the EOC or the IC, the EOC manager director brings everyone together to listen to the briefing, and she's gonna mention the same roles that the people in here have, right? And those parallel roles may eventually start talking to each other. They should start talking to each other and see how they can support that effort, right? That's kind of how it's all set up. So with that, the primary functions of the EOCs, it's to collect, analyze, and share information. Support resource needs and requests, including allocating and tracking. So there could be some city resources that get used for the incident, right? Coordinated through this EOC. Another one is to coordinate plans and determine current and future needs. And again, that's not plans on how to mitigate the emergency or the event. It's what's happening that the city has control over and is willing to support with, right? And future needs could be just feeding the staff here at EOC, right? So logistics, when we get to you, that's going to be one of your roles potentially if the director gives you that objective. And then in some cases has providing coordination and policy direction. Okay. So with that, similar to the way an incident is managed, you'll have a incident commander or a director in the EOC language, with oversight of all of the responsibilities and actions. So under that, you will have, have you seen the binder yet? I don't want to set Carl up for, because a big part of this was, but this is the management binder. I don't know where the camera is. And every one of the tables has their own binder specific to their kind of identifying their role and their responsibilities. And I was going to just go around the room and have everyone in their binder. So I'm giving you a heads up for logistics, planning, operations, and finance to find that page if you can. And it just kind of speaks to what your role is. And usually they're just 2 sentences in there. Yeah, sorry if I set you up for something, but which one?
The binder here.
Oh, this one?
Oh,
okay.
Had it reviewed, yes.
Is that Carl's in there too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, simply this document was new. I did.
Yeah, so it's kind of a.
Okay.
Each section breaking down what the departments go where, then the responsibility is essentially.
Perfect.
What you.
Can I pass it down? Here, Carl, there's a softball right there. The management section one, and then we'll just pass it down the line. So the idea here with the next, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so is just for every one of starting with the director, his roles and kind of an explanation of what, he's going to be doing in this situation. And then the other 4 sections, which is finance, logistics, operations, and planning. Okay. So we can just do that.
Yeah, I find a little caveat is, so ICS obviously has the structure in place of the sections. And when you look at them on their face, because some of these terms kind of align with how cities are organized. So planning doesn't mean that necessarily planners.
Right.
Planners here. Are working the planning section. Typically your finance people want, but the training is interchangeable. So the management section, especially now, if Mark or I is not here, we may not be filling that role. It might be the first person that gets in the room. Just thinking who's close, it might be Lindy or Luis close. They might be filling that role. So a lot of these, in terms of how they're staffed, are somewhat interchangeable. So that's just a key thing to think about. So the management section, I'll kick off here, is responsible for the overall management, emergency policy coordination with the joint efforts of the government agency and private organizations. Elements may include managing the overall emergency response and recovery effort, overseeing and directing the operations, planning, intelligence, logistics, finance, and administration sections in the EOC, utilizing the instant command system. So the functions include city council, city managers, the default EOC director, assistant city managers, the EOC manager, and then legal support as well. That's operations. Operations, is that operations?
So at the city of Ojai, do we have, like, I would have no idea where I am assigned to. I've worked in incident command, logistics planning, PIO as
Yeah.
a public works employee.
Yes, so it is broken down.
Okay.
So in particular, public works, it would be logistics.
Okay, I'm
Logistics.
looking at the logistics right over Betsy's
Yeah.
shoulder. So I
Yeah,
think that,
so-
I was thinking that was it.
Yeah, so for logistics, and I'll just kind of shift to logistics, that's what public works, IT and recreation is. So logistics, the overview is primary responsibility is to ensure acquisition, transportation, and mobilization of resources to support the response efforts at a disaster site, public shelter, EOC, et cetera. This section provides all necessary personnel, supplies, and equipment, procurement support, methods for obtaining and using facility equipment, supplies, services, and other resources to support emergency response to all operation sites during emergency/disaster conditions. Will be at the same, will be the same as the used that are used during normal operations unless authorized by the EOC director or emergency orders of the city council. This function or this function includes, as I mentioned earlier, IT, public works, as well as the recreation department. Following that, operations as defined here would fall under law enforcement, fire, medical, in addition to public works as well. So it's kind of a joint effort there as well, and building and safety. Building the safety is another big part of this. So we have a contract building official who, how we just had the earthquake, would go into the buildings, assure that they are safe to inhabit and move from there. With that, it goes on to planning. And as well as intelligence section, and I'll kick this over to Weston, which this would include the public information officer as well as the clerk's names. That first page, the bottom section.
I'm assuming the clerk's role would be attesting to things signed, but do you want me to read on these instructions? Am I gonna read the highlighted portion?
Yeah, so essentially the clerk's office, what the clerk's office as well as IT. You're gonna be responsible for the planning and intelligence, it can be levels of all to offices.
Okay. Planning intelligence section overview. The planning intelligence section primary responsibility is to collect, evaluate, display, and disseminate incident information and status of resources. This section functions as the primary support for decision-making to the overall emergency organization. This section also provides anticipatory appraisals and develops plans necessary to cope with changing field events. This section primarily gathers and documents information to answer critical questions. What are the incidents? How bad are the incidents? How much worse will the incidents become? How can we best manage the incidents during a disaster emergency? Other department heads will advise the planning intelligence coordinator on various courses of action from their departmental level perspective. Functions include PIO, city clerk's office, community development department.
And then with that, if you'd like to pass it over to finance, I think finance has the section there as well.
So the finance administration section primary responsibility is to maintain to the greatest extent possible the financial system necessary to keep the city functioning during the disaster or emergency. These include payroll, payments, revenue collection, claim processing, cost recovery, documentation. This section also supervises the negotiation and administration of vendor and supply contracts and procedures. The extent of the disaster emergency will determine the extent to which the finance administration section will mobilize. In a low-level emergency, only part of the section will be mobilized. In a widespread disaster that damages communication and system, the entire section will be mobilized. Functions include finance. Just finance. For us, it's really, what we would do is, from past experience, contact the county EOC finance section. We would want the incident number so we can tie it to the county. From my experience, the city usually receives federal funding or reimbursement through the county. So for everybody else, if you're buying something or using our equipment, make sure you use the passcode or the project number that we would issue for us so that we can keep track of, you know, the time you work, and then you need to keep a log. I think it's called the 214.
This form's in this cover right here.
Yeah, so that it's necessary when we have to have that form. What are you doing from what time to what time? Because that's needed for reimbursement purposes.
But even their time alone, even though they're maybe not, they're just, and the EOC is also needs to be documented.
Right, if you're still working on
Yeah.
the project, yes, the cleanup and, you know, everything else that comes out.
I know my experience, I was in the EOC for a shift during the Thomas fire. There's not 10 people in here, city staff, doing all these different things. There were me, myself, and 2 others, and then the city manager. So even though your role may be logistics, you are going to do other things as well. So even if it's just reminding everyone to fill out your form when you go to, you know, if you went and bought, you know, if you could even get food at Westridge. I had some, you know, you went and bought food at Westridge or whatever. You need, you know, to do that, even though you're not in operations or what have you. So, and you're not in finance, but
Yeah.
and just so you just do which needs to be done, regardless of your actual section.
Yeah, and I think to elaborate on what Andrea just noted, while we went through and read every single section, I think it's that old saying, we are as strong as our weakest link, and we here at the city definitely believe in cross training. So what Andrea mentioned, she's now in city manager's office, but before we worked that shift, it was in public
Public
works.
works, correct.
For me, prior, I was the city's PIO, now logistics. So it's definitely that cross training. We believe in that because, like Andrea said, while we may be assigned to a certain section now, we can definitely jump in and help out where needed, as needed, right? So.
So for finance, don't wait for us to tell you what the project code is. Just write, you know, fire, what month and year. We'll be able to tie it all together.
Do we hit all the sections? Right, operations, yeah, logistics, fine. Where does the PIO fit in all this? In the structure of the team?
Yeah.
Well,
It's sort of
Is
a
it-
new role.
was-
There yet, but
No, you're like,
it's, yeah, it would be giving out information to the public, getting information from the county or state or
Verifying information.
verifying first,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because it's on Facebook, doesn't mean it's true.
yeah, not to downplay any other role in here, but the PIO will probably be the busiest.
Yeah.
Honestly speaking, you know, and so in the structure of this, the PIO works directly for the director.
Yeah.
That's just the way it, same with fire and law when they're on their incidents, the PIO works directly with the incident commander, you know, and they call it the command staff. But the reason I bring that up, one, because it wasn't briefed, I want to make sure you had that opportunity, but it is if the city, my guess as a resident of the city is my expectations are if there's some kind of incident or issue that affects the city, that our city leadership has control of it and is managing it from their role in staying in their lanes and everything, and that there's proper and accurate information coming out from the city. That's just what they expect. Granted, the county is doing all the work to mitigate the emergency. We understand that, but the city has a role. It's a supporting role in that, and a big part of it is just getting accurate information. And it's really getting the information from the county and just passing it on with a city voice behind it, because that makes people that live in the city feel like, our city's doing something. So again, not downplaying anything, but that's just the reality of our community. They expect a lot from our city and from our county. And hopefully they're reassured by either watching this or, talking about this later, that the coordination between the two is very good. And, it's exercised every day. So, wow, to be an emergency.
Activate.
Maybe that's it, right?
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's our sign.
So it was mentioned, I think finance, you might have talked about this. This is all scalable, meaning it can be the full staffing that we have here, or it could just be the director and the PIO sitting in here, setting up for, a 24 or 36 hour event where we really just need to make sure we get accurate information out. That's, again, all at the discretion of the city manager's office. Or again, it could be the full scale deal. With that, and we're not going to get into the nuts and bolts of exactly how all of this interaction works with all the players here. What I would suggest to Carl is that in the future, we continue this discussion and that we provide some kind of training for the staff that's in here. And we do get down to the nuts and bolts, and we maybe throw out a tabletop or a couple of them and just exercise and practice. What is it like when you were just telling me about a hazmat spill? You guys were mocked up in Camarillo, and you were telling me about a hazmat spill you had at your previous employment. So hazardous material spill, right? We have trucks coming through the city all the time on Highway 150 and 33. One of them tips over and leaks out product. So now not only do you have hazard on the ground, you have it in the air, it's blown across populations. You have to evacuate, you have to close down major highways. I mean, that can be a serious impact. And depending on the product and the cleanup and where it went, if it's in the waterways, it could be multi-days of mitigation. Okay, that's not an earthquake or a fire, but I guarantee you that's going to be a head scratcher for the city manager. We could probably open up, maybe, I'm going to start having conversations with public safety and see what their take is on it. And, I would imagine some of the questions are, how long are we going to be impacted? It could be days, so think about that one, right? And I know you guys just practiced it and you lived it. So that's what I would suggest moving forward, is that we have more hands-on training for the role players in here, and that we exercise these binders, update the binders. But just know, if you're listening to this or watching this at home, that these binders have got a lot of detail in them. They can be updated a little bit just with different names, because we've had some turnover, but the procedures aren't changing, and it still models what public safety does to mitigate the hazard, which simplifies the support role that the EOC has. So that's really all I had as far as just exposing everyone to what this physically looks like and what the roles are and how it's coordinated between all the players here, including the players at the county EOC level. Any other input or questions about it?
I just have a question for you, Carl, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a movement towards scheduling annual EOC training for staff, since there has been a lot of turnover and newbies who may not have participated before?
I would like to do something quarterly, and it may not be this. It
Right.
could be as simple as at our different city facilities, really just mocking up an earthquake and how to evacuate the building or to collect. So it may not be this, but I'd like to do something quarterly. When we come back to this, I already talked to a few things. Well, actually, wondering about what I'd like to do. So I'd like to have just a very basic, separate from this, a kickoff binder that would just be there. That's how to set up, and we'll see if you're the first person. So that will just show the layout of the room, where things go. So we'd have a kickoff binder. So I'd like to have just setting up the room. Something else I saw going to other EOCs came out, I think I mentioned to you, best practice. One gentleman is an EOC manager who came out of the military. One of the things, I'll call them placemats for lack of a better term, but they're customized maps that will go on tables, and it goes down to the computer goes here, the emergency directory goes here, phone goes here. Because it makes it super simple. They're color coded, you throw them out, and it shows you where everything goes. And you know that. So once we have some of that stuff in place, I'd like to walk through it. But the goal would be quarterly, and it may not always be EOC training. It might be, like I said, evacuating, and then getting a more current emergency contact director, staff, partners. The last thought, I'm always reassured we do have county agencies because they have folks that think about this every day for their full-time jobs. So it's a wonderful resource. Yeah.
Hey, County.
Yeah, I know the Patrick Maynard and his staff, and Patrick Maynard is the director of the county EOC or Office of Emergency Services, actually. They have plans to train cities, give them annual training on EOC activations and all this discussion that we're having. So, yeah, I would lean on it as much as we can,
And then one other thought, not from me, but just from Mark. If anyone's, I would strongly encourage it. If you just go to the FEMA website, I would register for your FEMA ID. I do that because it will track your training. But just as very introductory, if you do the IAS 100 and 200, it's a great overview. It'll give you a little certificate showing you did it, but I would make sure you register for your ID so FEMA can track your future training. So I wouldn't do it as a guest, I'd actually register. But 100 and 200 are great. Cal OES has some separate training that's good as well. It's a little more advanced, but when you kind of go into the FEMA training, you can get very specific. I mean, there's probably hundreds of courses, most online, some in person. But there's even specific stuff for sections or PIO. If you get a little more advanced in some of the communications platforms, there's some that are required if you're doing like the reverse 911, you have to have certain certifications. As a very basic introduction, it's just a few hours to do the two, I believe, the 100 and 200 great starting points. So I know Mark would strongly encourage everyone to partake in that. If you do, go ahead and shoot your certificate over to Connie, stick in your personnel file.
Carl, do you think we could get Patrick Maynard here to give us a training?
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you.
that's all I have. Again, any other input or questions? What the future holds?
I just have a comment. This is for the public and just for everybody here. We deal with public safety every day.
Yeah.
So this type of stuff, a lot of us have been through situations, EOC situations, activations, floods, fires. So just to reassure the public, like we do this every day, especially fire, especially the sheriff department. So, we are trained to think and how to provide services to the public and to the community. Want to reassure that.
Yeah.
We do that every day.
Right. Yeah, a lot of these roles you do every day anyways, right? That's why that's how the EOCs got designed originally, and that was definitely a thought in mind for sure. There's a reason why public works is in this discussion and sits at the table for sure. And that's not only this city, but all entities. So, yeah,
Very Kevin.
yeah. So you guys are ready to put the backhoe up on the.
We're planning for small emergencies, during the rain. We have a team set up for, rain events.
We work with you guys all the time and And on the county side also, in the unincorporated areas, it's a huge, coordinated resource that if we can't get there, Public Works usually has the tools to get us there, open the roads. They have the front loaders, and yeah, it's a great working relationship.
Yeah, it's a good example. Andrew, I think you were telling me, the floods, I don't know how long ago it was, but there was one of our neighborhoods up by Topatopa School had some drainage issues, so it
Daly
was
Park,
Davy Park, right? So it was starting to back up and starting to threaten a few homes.
Big Mud.
And of course, you'd have fire and law there mitigating, but they may have their hands busy on a lot of other things. And it's like, everyone was talking, it's like, well, we have equipment here in the city. We can go handle that ourselves. Not that you have to ask for permission, but you need to coordinate, right? You don't want to duplicate services, right? You want to be as efficient as you can. And I think in that situation, the city just mitigated itself with heavy equipment and staff, from your
Is that right?
vision.
James was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But kind of a simple example of how to coordinate and be efficient and not duplicate services.
I do know we got FEMA reimbursement for that, because I remember doing the invoicing for it, so that's another documentation. That was just crew time and, and equipment, but we still did get reimbursement for it. That's important to just document everything.
Well, and it's good. Again, it may not be a full activation. I'm not trying to get into your head or your decision processes at all, but it may not be an EOC evacuation. I'm about done, right? Activation. But if you're thinking about what it is the EOC can do in a situation like that, and it may be as simple as some city equipment was used to mitigate an issue within city jurisdiction as part of an overall countywide flood disaster, right? But yeah, we can, that conversation is pretty, hey, do you have equipment? Can you go out there and handle it? Yeah, we can handle it. But if you talk to finance and they go, hey, just make sure they document, do this or that, and we could seek reimbursement because we have a declared disaster, or whatever it is, then planning could even get involved and help with, a map of actually what they did, and that could go for the documentation. You can see how all the roles would start having some input. Even if the input is just the suggestion, it's like, hey, we should document this because we may get reimbursed. If that came from the finance side, that in itself is a win too, because it's proper to get reimbursed for that situation, So yeah, just again, small scale examples of what the EOC could do on a smaller scale, right? It's not always this room filled. So we could go on and on about scenarios. I think we can save that for a future date and just do some training.
Yeah, I think that's fair to do a future training outside the disaster council.
Yeah.
Videos of the staff and walk through maybe a setup of the EOC, and at the end do a little after action debrief on what worked, what didn't work, and what to be improved.
Sure, that'd be great. Okay, that's it for facilitating this part of the meeting.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Yeah. You're welcome.
You gotta use the gavel.
Oh, boy. Well, I just wanted to say a big thank you, John. You're too modest. Your experience and expertise are such a gift to our community. So thank you so much for volunteering. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really a heartwarming experience to be with all of you and see how everybody is so committed to helping and protecting our community. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And your interview.
Nice.